There's something I've kept quiet about for a long time. Years ago, I signed a contract agreeing to remain silent in exchange for a hefty sum. That agreement lasted 10 years, and now that time has passed. I could choose to leave it in the past and keep living as if it never happened, but here I am, posting anonymously online. Maybe the distance of the screen makes it easier. It all began on a stiflingly hot day in West Virginia. I was driving back home from visiting my aunt, who'd recently broken her leg. Taking the I-64 out of Lewisburg, I noticed the radio flickering. It was playing a familiar tune that suddenly began to cut in and out. Then the sound stopped entirely. Up ahead, cars were honking as traffic started to slow. I could feel a gust of wind pushing against the left side of my car, forcing me to steer the other way to keep balance. Dust blew across the windshield, forcing me to close the sunroof. That's when the rumbling began, a deep, groaning sound, like thunder coming from the ground itself. The noise grew louder until it became almost deafening. In the distance, trees began to topple over, and I watched as a small Kia lost its grip and veered off the road. Chaos ensued. Cars were switching lanes, braking suddenly, and in the confusion, my door got scraped by a vehicle speeding past. Then an automated message came through the radio. It was a local emergency alert, calling it a geological event. The message urged us to turn off our air conditioning, slow down, and take the nearest exit. Minutes later, we were being diverted by police officers blocking all other routes and directing traffic toward a highway exit. Officers in gas masks and riot shields stood at the barricades, enforcing the detour. The exit led us to an open field, quickly becoming a makeshift parking lot. Cars were parked in tight rows with no space to open doors, forcing us all to stay put. I was surrounded by strangers, many on their phones. Those signals were spotty. Some people tried to film what was happening, but it was nearly impossible to upload anything. The network was overloaded, and soon, signals were entirely cut off. As tension mounted, officers patrolled with stern warnings. One fired a shot into the air, ordering us to stay in our vehicles with windows up, doors locked, and engines off. Rumors began to spread. Some said there'd been a natural gas leak, while others whispered about a terrorist attack. Nobody had answers, and the officers weren't talking. Hours passed, and the atmosphere grew increasingly uncomfortable. An officer climbed across the hoods of the cars, distributing water, crackers, and hygiene bags for those who couldn't wait. The heat and confinement were unbearable. I tried to distract myself, playing games on my phone, but the battery was draining fast. Eventually, I leaned back, closed my eyes, and tried to rest, though my mind raced. Sweat trickled down my face, not from the heat, but from a creeping feeling of claustrophobia. Trapped, unable to move, with no idea of what was happening. I felt the walls closing in, a deep panic rising as I struggled with how little control I had over the situation. Is this what claustrophobia feels like? Up by the front of the line, I noticed two officers having a quiet discussion. One of them wore a white cotton glove, which he used to swipe dust off the hood of a nearby car. When he finished, he removed the glove and sealed it in a plastic bag with a hot air gun. Watching this, it struck me that maybe our cars had been covered in something, and I wasn't alone in that thought. Two college kids in the car next to me were speculating too. Anthrax? One of them suggested, looking uneasy. Nah, the other chuckled. Maybe they're hiding some kind of gold dust they don't want to share. I hope you're right, the first kid said, though he didn't sound convinced. I joined in, offering the idea that maybe it was something combustible, something that could blow up if we started our engines. They seemed willing to consider that too. In the car behind me, someone held up a notebook with hastily scrawled words that barely made sense. A middle-aged man and his daughter sat nearby, along with others trapped in their vehicles. The occupants were an odd mix. A man in a black shirt who looked like a preacher, two middle-aged women with a kid in the back seat, a heavy-set guy playing Johnny Cash, and a restless teenage boy who couldn't stop drumming on his window. After we'd been there for what felt like hours, a large unmarked truck rolled up, hauling a big water tank. Over the loudspeaker, a voice announced that they'd be hosing down our cars and then covering them with protective plastic. Please keep everything locked and closed, the voice instructed. Relief spread through the crowd. Soon, we'd be free to leave, or so it seemed. As the sky grew dark, they started spraying down the vehicles. The smell of chlorine hung thick in the air, and when they reached my car, they double-checked to ensure my sunroof was sealed before dousing it with a chemical wash. The fumes clung to everything, a harsh, chemical odor that settled at the back of my throat. Once the hosing was complete, they began laying out a massive plastic cover, stretching it over the entire lot with the help of squad cars to keep it in place. Please stay calm, the voice continued. This is for your safety. Stay in your vehicle at all times. I sat still, watching as the plastic sheet slowly spread over the cars, encasing us like a second skin. It felt like being buried alive. Soon, I was plunged into pitch blackness, with only muffled voices and faint flashlight beams piercing the dark. The college kids next to me chatted idly about where they'd go once this was over. Somewhere, a car honked, though I couldn't tell if it was out of frustration or solidarity. Someone else let out a whoop, trying to keep the spirits up. Settling back in the driver's seat, I let my mind wander. I went between gripping the wheel in determination and feeling like I was trapped inside a metal coffin. The smell of plastic and chemicals lingered, thick and overpowering, making the entire scene feel like a nightmarish car wash suspended in time. As time dragged on, I began to hear muffled voices from the officers, their tones tense and heated. Another hour passed, and people were becoming restless, honking, shouting, demanding answers. My leg bounced nervously, and I struggled to focus on anything other than how small and confined the car felt. I was out of water, uncomfortable, and yearning for fresh air. Suddenly, engines began revving, and I could hear a few cars speeding off somewhere to the side. An officer's voice rang out over the loudspeaker. "Stay in your vehicle. Do not leave for any reason." Despite the command, I could hear a few more cars taking off before everything went silent again. The officers were gone, and we were left in the dark. Some people turned on their phone flashlights, the beams casting a haunting glow over the sea of trapped vehicles. All of us were trapped under that dark plastic cover, the faint glow of phone lights casting sharp silhouettes around the lot. Everyone had become just an anonymous shadow, the identities of my fellow drivers swallowed by the darkness. Somewhere behind me, I heard a gasp, then a metallic clunk, just like when the officers had been moving atop our cars earlier. A cautious cheer broke out, some people hopeful the cover was finally coming off. But it wasn't. Instead, I heard more footsteps, a lot more than before. The tentative cheers faded as the footsteps multiplied, pattering across our cars, one after another, a heavy, unending procession. I stopped counting after a dozen. Everyone was silent, holding their breath, waiting for answers that never came. Then, out of the quiet, an older voice called out from somewhere to my right. "Who's up there?" In response, the footsteps stopped, replaced by an eerie clicking sound, like someone snapping their tongue against the roof of their mouth. A few more clicks echoed in response, coming from all directions, cascading through the rows of cars. Suddenly, a horrible metallic noise came from my right, followed by the sound of shattering glass and a short, cut-off scream. More glass shattered, followed by sharp, irregular car horn blasts. The dim silhouettes of people nearby blurred in panic as something dark burst through windshields and shredded the plastic cover. Somewhere near the front, I saw a car's roof ripped open, someone pulled from their seat by a force I couldn't see. The distant flashes of red splattered against passenger side windows. I couldn't breathe. My heart was hammering as primal fear gripped me. My fingers cramped around the steering wheel, and sweat drenched my back. Across from me, I saw the college kids frantically ducking down, one of them waving at me to get down too. I nodded and scrambled into the back seat, trying to stay low. In the chaotic darkness, I couldn't see where my hands or feet were going, and as I clumsily climbed, my foot accidentally tapped the horn. It blared for a split second, a blaring echo of vulnerability in the quiet chaos. A heavy thud landed on the hood of my car. Whatever was outside was much heavier than the officers had been. I clamped my hands over my mouth to stifle my breathing, inhaling the salty sting of sweat as I bit my tongue, barely daring to make a sound. The weight shifted, and I could hear the frame of the car creaking under its load. It reached my sunroof, and the faint sound of cracking glass made me wince. I silently begged it to hold, but the crack widened, and with a final shatter, glass rained down on my legs as a mass of plastic dipped through the opening. Something large slipped into the front seat. It twitched and spun in the plastic, clicking madly, a frantic, incessant noise, like an alarm calling others. I heard footsteps gathering, some leaping from car to car, others moving with a speed that made my blood run cold. They would reach me in moments. Desperate, I fumbled for the passenger door, cutting my thumb on the broken glass. With trembling hands, I pushed it open and tried to slip through the narrow gap, pressing myself as close to the college kid's car as I could. My chest tightened as I exhaled, flattening my body to escape, though I could feel the edges of my vision darkening from lack of air. Somehow, I managed to slip out, collapsing face first onto the gravel below, chemicals burning my skin. I fought the urge to bolt, forcing myself to lie still, stomach pressed against the ground, hiding beneath my car as the chaos unfolded above. I could hear glass shattering, fabric tearing, and frustrated thrashing as something tried to pull itself free. It sounded like a wild animal, trapped and furious. In the distance, I could hear the muffled, fearful murmurs of the college kids and the scattering footsteps of whatever horror surrounded us. In the pitch-black silence, I could hear one of the college kids nearby trying to keep his friend calm, whispering that if they just stayed low and quiet, they might make it through. A shuddering crash suddenly jolted me as something slammed against the passenger door. The door I'd barely crawled out of. It was wedged against the neighboring car and then tore free, falling to the ground with a jarring clang. My blood ran cold as an enormous, inky black foot stepped into the gravel beside me. I couldn't breathe. I've since looked it up. It was like the foot of a massive bird of prey, but scaled up to unnatural proportions, with 3 clawed toes forward and 1 claw pointing backward, smooth as if coated in oil. Whatever creature this was, it must have been at least 7 feet tall, likely more if it were standing upright. But in the darkness, it looked sleek and dangerously thin, weaving gracefully between the cars like it was stalking prey. The thing moved on, tapping its claws against car windows, and somewhere nearby, someone let out a startled scream. That sound ignited chaos. All at once, the plastic cover was being shredded as people fought to escape. Some kicked at their windshields, others battered their doors open, trying to get out into the open air. There was even a burst of gunfire echoing in the distance. In a panicked scramble, the college kids tumbled out of their car and rolled under it, their faces streaked with sweat and tears. One of them tried calling for help on his phone, but the other quickly slapped it from his hands, silencing it before the noise could draw attention. He set the phone to ring and slid it under another car far away. Moments later, every window of that car shattered, and the vehicle was ripped to pieces by a frenzy of those creatures, leaving no sign of the people inside. The night was filled with desperate cries and muffled footsteps, and one of the college kids kept repeating, "Shut up, shut up." Suddenly, something clawed under my car, snagging the sole of my shoe and slicing straight through to my toe. Instinct took over, and I scrambled forward, every nerve on edge as I pulled myself along. The college kids moved too, crawling forward in tandem. I slipped 2 cars down, but came to a sudden halt. A dark, hulking shape lay in the way, blocking my path. I could smell the sharp, metallic tang of blood as warm liquid seeped toward my fingers. It didn't take long to realize what it was. A dreadful crunch filled the air as one of those things bit down on someone, tearing through fabric and flesh alike. The ground beneath me grew sticky as the blood pooled out, staining my hands. I bit down hard, forcing myself not to scream as I listened to every gruesome sound of bones snapping and tendons tearing, the creature making satisfied clicking noises as it fed. The horror lasted for what felt like an eternity, the silence broken only by the slow drag of its footsteps as it finally wandered off, taking the remains of its meal with it. Only after the creature had passed did I dare to move. I crawled toward the edge of the plastic cover, pushing a weight aside as I slipped through to the outside world. With the night air rushing into my lungs, I felt an immense relief as I stumbled upright, too shaken even to cry. A breeze dried the sweat from my brow, carrying the faint scent of grass and earth. Turning back, I could see the wreckage, a twisted sea of cars and shattered glass, torn metal and blood staining the plastic cover. But then, my gaze froze as I spotted one of those creatures perched atop an old Honda. At a distance, it almost resembled a human, but its slick, black skin and massive, clawed feet were anything but. A mouth lined with rows of shark-like teeth stretched too wide across its face, watching me intently. I couldn't move. As I locked eyes with it, it lifted a piece of raw meat, blood dripping from its fingers, and took a slow bite, studying me with detached curiosity. Then, satisfied, it simply wandered away, disappearing into the shadows. It took hours for the officers to return. They finally removed the plastic cover, but we weren't allowed to leave until we signed a waiver agreeing to keep silent about what we'd witnessed. In exchange, we'd receive a tidy sum in insurance money. They insisted it had been a combination of a traffic accident, carbon monoxide poisoning, and a supposed animal attack. Some folks even signed willingly, too relieved to argue, while others demanded answers and were quickly taken into custody. In the end, they reported 14 dead, explaining away the timing of the deaths to make it seem like a standard accident. 34 cars were towed, and many survivors left injured and traumatized. For people lost limbs. Even now, at night, I sometimes hear the shattering glass and desperate screams echoing in my memory. I close my eyes, and it's like I'm still there, lying beneath that car, feeling the weight of those things shifting above me, pressing me down. A part of me stayed there that night, hidden in the darkness and forever listening for the clicking of claws.